You're watching the Everything Network.
Mob historians place the Silver Fox killing near the beginning of John Jr.'s real underworld reputation, not because it made him powerful overnight, but because it put his name next to a dead man, a barroom fight, a police investigation, a payoff story, and a witness problem that did not go away. In the version laid out later through Jr.'s own 2005 account, and in the broader trial material discussed in the book, the trouble starts inside the Silver Fox with a petty clash that turns violent fast. Jr. is at the bar with a woman named Donna when a man known as Elfie keeps bumping into him. Words are exchanged, tempers rise, and Jr. says he hits Elfie with a broken bottle and then grabs a knife that had come from another man in the place. After that, the whole room breaks apart into a fight involving 30 to 40 people. Danny Silva is caught in that chaos and ends up stabbed to death. That is the first layer of the story: a crowded bar, a sudden fight, a knife in Jr.'s hand, and Danny Silva dead before the place can settle. The names around the scene are not random either. Jr. later recalled Danny Silva there, John and Angelo Castelli there, Joey Curio there, Riley there, and John Sonomo there. That matters because the Silver Fox does not end as one closed moment inside a bar. It spills outside the building and into the next phase almost immediately. Because once Danny Silva is dead, the question is no longer who started the argument. The question becomes who was seen, who was identified, and whose name the police are hearing. That is where Jr.'s orbit around the case begins. A short time after the killing, Jr. says Angelo Ruggiero met Detective John Daly at the Sherwood Diner near the Queens-Nassau line. Jr. drove Ruggiero there, sat outside, and knew what the meeting was for before it started. Ruggiero was carrying a brown paper bag with cash in it. Jr. later said the amount was $25,000, and that the point of the payment was to get his name removed from the Silver Fox murder investigation. Daly did not meet Jr. face-to-face in the diner, but Jr. said Daly acknowledged him as he left, which told him all he needed to know about what the money had just bought. After that, the family's response is not to clear things up in public. It is to move Jr. out of sight. John Gotti Sr. tells him to leave New York until the heat cools down, and Jr. goes to Fort Lauderdale. That is an important part of the Silver Fox story, because it shows how the family treated the danger. They did not behave as though this was some harmless neighborhood scrape. They behaved as though Jr.'s name had become too hot to leave sitting in Queens. At some point, John Gotti Sr. joins him in Florida, and later they both return to New York. By then, the killing at the Silver Fox is no longer just a dead man in a bar. It is a case with money around it, police interest around it, and the Gotti name already moving through it. Then comes the witness side, which is what pushed the whole thing into darker territory. When Jr. gets back to New York, he learns that John Sonomo, one of Danny Silva's friends, and one of the men who had been present the night Silva was killed, is dead too, supposedly by hanging. But the account Jr. later gives is that the death was not a suicide at all. He says Angelo Ruggiero told him that Sonomo had kept pressure on the police and kept pressing Jr.'s name in the Silver Fox investigation. Ruggiero also told him that police reports on the Silva murder had been obtained through Daly, and that Sonomo was later killed on John Gotti Sr.'s orders by Ruggiero, Joe Watts, and Willie Boy Johnson, with Daly providing the background that helped them locate him. That changes the Silver Fox from a bar killing into a chain reaction, a homicide, a payoff, a disappearance from town, and then a witness turning up dead. The trial material discussed later adds one more ugly detail. Prosecutors described Danny Silva not as someone who simply died in a melee, but as someone who was gutted, and they pushed the claim that Jr. returned to the scene and mocked him while he was still bleeding. Whether every listener accepts every line of that version or not, the reason mob historians keep returning to the Silver Fox is easy to understand. It contains nearly every pattern that would follow Jr. through the years. Sudden violence, other people left to absorb the damage, the family moving money and influence behind the scenes, and the effort to bury a problem before it reached the wrong ears. It is one of the earliest moments where Junior stops looking like just the boss's son and starts looking like a real danger to the people around him. The Silver Fox killing was one of the first moments that put John Jr.'s name next to real blood and real consequences. A fight starts over something small. Junior gets physical. Danny Silver ends up dead. Junior's name starts circling in the investigation almost right away. Junior is sent to Florida while things calm down. Then a friend of the dead man, someone who kept pressing the case, winds up dead too. That is why the Silver Fox stays important. It is one of the first times we can see the violence itself, the protection system behind it, and the way one dead man can turn into two once the wrong people keep talking. The first real line of money Junior Gotti made was along Jamaica Avenue. It was said to begin when John Alite came back from California and went straight back into cocaine sales in Queens. He was not moving huge weight at that point. He was buying smaller amounts, stretching them, and using a few people to move packets through neighborhood bars. Then Johnny Gabert told him Junior wanted to see him. The meeting was about money from the start. Junior wanted a weekly payment. Alite pushed back because he said he was not making the kind of money Junior had in mind. But after the arguing was over, the number settled lower, and the arrangement was set. Money would be handed over each week through Gabert. That is one of the clearer early looks at Junior's street rule. He was not starting as a polished boss with a formal structure. He was starting by stepping into local drug business and taking a percentage from men already working there. Once that line was established, the business widened. Kevin Bonner and Georgie Grosso were already selling cocaine in the same Jamaica Avenue bar stretch, and their trade was already tied into Junior's orbit. But Junior did not want only a piece of what they were earning. He wanted a bigger supply line and a tighter hold on the avenue. Alite says Junior and Johnny Boy Ruggiero had access to a supplier named Tony Kelly, who could move a full kilo at a time. Junior wanted Bonner folded into a larger buy, so the cost could be split 3 ways and the profits pushed higher. Bonner hesitated because he did not want to cut Grosso out. Junior answered the hesitation the way he often answered resistance in those years. He sent men to make the point physically. They found 2 of Bonner's sellers outside the White Horse Tavern, went at them with bats, and one of the men ended up thrown through a store window. The message was plain enough. Bonner understood it the next day and agreed to come in. A few days later, the cocaine buy took place in Howard Beach. The package came out of a car trunk. The kilo was divided. Bonner took his share, and the rest went with Alite for resale. From there, the business changed scale. Instead of a few people moving smaller amounts through neighborhood bars, the Jamaica Avenue operation became a larger pipeline with Junior above it, Alite running heavy work through it, and others left to either buy through them or send money upward to stay active. In that account, this is where the avenue starts turning from scattered local dealing into a more organized line of tribute and control. That is why this period is important. It shows how Junior's local power was built. He leaned on existing owners. He used violence to settle resistance fast. Then he moved the street from loose neighborhood, dealing toward a structure where supply, profit, and protection were increasingly tied to him. That was the first real Jamaica Avenue tax. The Jamaican shooting came earlier, and it helps explain how Alite learned what working with Junior and Johnny Gabert really meant. Gabert had gone into what was supposed to be a marijuana deal with a Jamaican crew and came out of it beaten, robbed, and angry. He lost several $1,000s and wanted retaliation right away. He also wanted the street to understand that robbing someone tied to Junior would not be ignored. Alite says Junior put the response together. Alite would drive the first car. Gabert would sit beside him and fire. Junior and another man named Jerry would follow in a second car and block traffic if the police showed up, giving the shooting car a chance to get clear. They met at Junior's club, took a stolen car for the lead vehicle, and drove toward the storefront, where the Jamaicans gathered near 117th Street and Jamaica Avenue. The plan began breaking down before the shooting even started. Gabert showed up high on angel dust. Alite took that as a bad sign right away. They made one pass, circled back, slowed near the storefront, and Gabbett leaned out the window and fired several shots at the men standing outside. A-Light saw them scatter, but did not know whether anybody had been hit. Then the police sirens came in almost immediately. A-Light made the planned turn and looked back for the second car. Instead of following the escape route and doing the job it was supposed to do, the blocker kept going. That left the shooting car exposed. Then it got worse. Gabbett bailed out and ran, leaving the gun behind on the passenger side floor. Now A-Light was alone in a hot car with a weapon inside and sirens nearby. No blocker. No shooter. No real cover. He drove a short distance, stopped on a narrow street, left the doors open to create an obstacle for anyone coming up behind him, ditched the gun, bought a soda, took off his shirt, and started jogging back toward the neighborhood so he would look like just another local kid outside on a run. He made it back without getting caught, but he did not forget what had just happened. Junior had approved the move. Gabbett had fired the shots. When it went bad, both of them were effectively gone, and A-Light was the one left holding the danger. Later, Junior blamed the confusion on Jerry panicking when he heard the police. A-Light did not believe that explanation. What stayed with him was simpler than that. The shooting told him that Junior wanted action and wanted people around him to prove themselves. But when the plan cracked open under pressure, somebody else could be left exposed. That is one reason the Jamaican drive-by stays important in the larger Gotti story. It was one of the earliest moments where A-Light got what he thought he wanted. A direct connection to Junior and a chance to show he could handle serious work. And at the same time got a hard look at how unstable that circle could be when the pressure hit. Georgie Grosso dies for two reasons at the same time, tied to the drug side of the crew, and he keeps running his mouth about where his protection comes from. The problem is not only that he is selling drugs. The larger problem is that he is telling people he is with Gotti and letting people think the Gottis are getting money from the drug trade. Inside that world, that kind of talk creates exposure, and exposure gets people killed. A-Light says Grosso and Johnny Goobert were both part of that same reckless pattern. They were in the drug world, they were useful while money was flowing, and they did not know when to shut up. Word kept getting back to Junior that Grosso was using the Gotti name to build status for himself. Grosso denied it when confronted and tried to reduce it to friendship, but the reports kept coming back. A-Light says Junior also started hearing that Grosso was using some of the product himself. Angel dust, cocaine, heroin, and that added another problem on top of the loose talk. A man who talks too much and uses too much starts looking weak, and in that life, weak men are treated like future informants. There is another piece that pushes Grosso closer to the edge. Around the same period, John Goobert tries to ambush A-Light with a car and a gun on Jamaica Avenue. A-Light runs, gets to safety, arms himself, and goes to Junior asking for permission to kill Goobert. Junior keeps holding him back. A-Light believes one reason for that is simple. Goobert is still a source of drug money. Grosso is not bringing in enough to be protected the same way, and A-Light says Junior used the fact that Grosso had been there during the Goobert ambush as one more reason to approve the hit. Once the order is given, the setup is built around comfort and familiarity. A-Light says the phrase inside the crew was to let him relax, and then take him out. He pulls together Phil Barone, an ex-New York City detective, Joey D., Nicky Tobia, a boyhood friend who worked as a Long Island cop and wanted into that life, and Tommy Chrissy. They watch Grosso's habits and learn that he regularly shows up late at the White Horse Tavern. The point is not speed. The point is to make the move look natural. The actual trap is simple. About a week before Christmas of 1988, they are already inside the White Horse Tavern on a Monday night with the football game on. Grosso comes in, sees familiar faces, and gets waved over. A-Light says he keeps himself sober by having the bartender pour him water while everyone else is getting vodka shots. They talk, laugh, and go over old neighborhood memories until Grosso starts to settle down and stops reading the room like a man in danger. When the game is winding down, A-Light suggests they keep the night going at an after-hours place near LaGuardia called the Executive Suite. Grosso first says he wants to go home, then changes his mind and goes along. He gets into a Chevy Blazer with Joey D driving, while A-Light and Phil Barone get in the back. When Grosso starts to sit in the rear, A-Light redirects him to the front seat. That detail matters, because it places him exactly where A-Light wants him, directly in front of the gunman. A second car follows behind with Tobia and Tommy Chrissy. A-Light describes it as the crash car, the backup vehicle in case something goes wrong. The original plan is to stop near a park off 88th Street and Atlantic Avenue, with A-Light pretending he has to step out. He says he changes that part because he does not want kids finding the body the next day. So the route keeps moving toward LaGuardia, and when they slow near the Jewel Avenue exit off the Grand Central Parkway, A-Light fires 3 shots into the back of Grosso's head. After the shooting, the body is dumped in brush near the guardrail by the Jewel Avenue exit, and the gun is thrown into a nearby lake. Then the whole thing turns cold right away. They go to the Esquire Diner in Queens and eat. A-Light remembers exactly what he ordered: a cheeseburger with extra cheese and a Coke. He also tells Joey D to clean out the Blazer thoroughly and get rid of it. The next morning, A-Light goes to meet Junior and tells him the job is done. They walk into the nail salon next to the Bergen, where they usually go, and that is where Gene Gotti comes into the picture. Junior starts talking too openly about what happened, and Gene immediately snaps at him for it. In this account, Gene's reaction is not moral outrage, it is operational anger. He thinks there could be bugs anywhere, even there, and he wants to know only whether the job actually happened the way A-Light said it did. Then comes one of the stranger details in the whole chain. Junior wants to go back and look at the scene for himself. A-Light drives him out toward the Jewel Avenue exit, and by then the place is full of police cars, investigators, and the coroner's van. They pass by while Grosso's body is being carried out. That moment tells a lot about Junior in this telling. He wants the hit done, he wants the message understood, and he wants to see the result with his own eyes. 4 days after Grosso's body is found, Junior is formally made into the Gambino family on Christmas Eve of 1988 in an apartment on Mulberry Street near the Ravenite. Sammy Gravano handles the induction. Michael DiLeonardo and 2 others go in the same night. John Gotti Sr. does not perform it himself, and later holds court at the club instead. That sequence is the point of the whole section. Grosso dies after being accused of using the Gotti name in the drug world, after acting like the protection behind him could be used as advertising, and after showing the kind of weakness that made people think he could become a risk. Junior comes out of that moment stronger, not weaker. A-Light's standing goes up because he has now done a major killing for the crew, but Junior gets the larger benefit. The hit lands, the warning goes out, and days later he is inside the family in a formal way. In that world, that is what counted. There is also a larger rule underneath all of it. A-Light says everybody knew the real arrangement. Drugs were being sold, money was being kicked up, and the men doing the work understood that if they were caught, they would be left to take the fall alone. The family could profit, but the family name could not be dragged into a case. Grosso broke that rule by talking too openly, by making himself look unstable, and by acting like being close to Junior meant he could say anything he wanted. In this account, that is what gets him killed. And that is why the Grosso hit is bigger than one murder. It shows how Junior's side of the family operated in that period. Money coming in from drugs, younger men carrying risk, names getting thrown around too casually, and violence used to control exposure as much as disloyalty. It also shows how promotion worked around Junior. A man could be reckless, greedy, and badly managed, but if he was feared, protected, and still moving upward inside the family line, the machine kept advancing him. Grosso ends up in the brush off Jewel Avenue, and 4 days later, Junior is standing inside the Gambino structure as a made man. By the time Bobby Borelli was killed, the problem around him was already active. He was not just another name in Junior's circle. He was close to Junior personally, close enough to stand as his best man, and close enough to be trusted when Junior moved up and started handing out serious work. Around that same period, Bobby was also carrying his own dispute with Preston Geritano, a fight over money that had already turned into threats. The danger was known before the shooting. People around Bobby understood that his problem had reached the point where it could turn into a body. The killing comes after that pressure has already been hanging there. About a month after A-Light goes to jail, Bobby Borelli, just past his 47th birthday, is shot 7 times outside his home in Bensonhurst. He is hit as he walks toward his new Lincoln Town car. His wife and 2 young children are inside the house when it happens. That is one of the details that gives the whole section its force. Bobby is not caught in a nightclub, not cornered in some back room, not pulled into a setup at a bar. He's reached outside his own home, in front of his family's world, and that tells everybody watching that the men behind it were comfortable bringing the violence straight to his doorstep. The first read in the street is immediate. The talk is that Preston Geritano settled the beef. John Gotti Sr., hearing about it from prison, is said to have taken the same view. That places the hit inside a larger line of tension between Junior's side and the Genovese side. This is not presented as one formal family war with public declarations and open campaigns. It is more specific than that. It is a personal dispute with family connections behind it, which is often how these things moved in real life. A money problem grows, threats are made, the wrong man is left exposed. Then the shooting happens, and now the weight of family politics gets pulled into it. The account says he later sat down with Genovese leaders and demanded that Geritano be killed in return. That is the revenge move. Bobby drops, and Junior wants an answer. He wants the other side to give him blood back. He is told it will be handled. Nothing comes from it. That failure is part of what gives the section its shape. Junior can ask. Junior can push. Junior can try to use the Gotti name in his own position to force a response, but the response never arrives. Bobby stays dead, and the promise goes nowhere. That leaves this whole stretch as more than a murder story. It becomes a look at Junior's actual position in that period. He is close enough to power to demand revenge, but not strong enough to guarantee it. Bobby Borelli is important because his death shows the limits of Junior's authority. A close man is killed. The street reads it as a Genovese-linked score being settled. Junior presses for retaliation. He gets words back, not action. That is the full weight of the section. Bobby is gone. The anger is real. And Junior learns that wanting revenge and getting it are not the same thing.
You're watching the Everything Network.
By the winter of 1992, Curtis Sliwa had become a steady problem for the Gotti name. He was on the radio talking about John Gotti every day, attacking the family in public, and doing it at the exact moment when John Gotti Sr. was heading into the most serious federal case of his life. In the account tied to John A-Light and later trial testimony, Junior took those broadcasts personally. He was not hearing them as media talk. He was hearing them as disrespect aimed at his father and, by extension, at himself. The Mafia files refer to that stretch as one where Junior was already acting with more ego and more impatience than judgment. A-Light says Junior told him directly that he wanted to hit Sliwa. A-Light pushed back right away because the target was not another hustler from Queens or Brooklyn. Sliwa was a radio figure, a public name, and touching him would bring heat that could not be contained. The pressure grew after John Gotti Sr. was convicted in April of 1992. Sliwa did not ease up. According to the book, the tipping point for Junior came when Sliwa appeared to celebrate the conviction on the air. About a month later, 3 men with baseball bats attacked Sliwa, and even that did not shut him down. He fought them off and went back on the radio. A few weeks after that, Junior met with Michael DeLeonardo and others at the Carousel Diner on Cross Bay Boulevard. That is where the order became direct. Junior wanted Sliwa put in the hospital. Not killed, but beaten badly enough that the message would register. DeLeonardo's account is important because it gives the listener the argument inside the room. He told Junior that touching a member of the press would bring a level of attention the crew did not need. Whether other reporters liked Sliwa or not did not matter. He was still part of the media, and going after him would damage everybody involved. Junior did not let go of it. The attack that followed did not even stay within the limits Junior had laid down. On the morning of June 19th, Sliwa got into what looked like a normal taxi on his way to the radio station. Joey D'Angelo was driving. Michael Iannotti was hidden low in the front passenger seat. The doors had been rigged, so they locked once Sliwa got in the back. Then Iannotti came up from the front, pulled a gun, and fired into Sliwa's thigh and groin. D'Angelo later said they were supposed to beat him, not shoot him. Sliwa later described fighting his way out, climbing over the front seat area, and forcing himself through the front passenger side to escape. Mob historians keep returning to that detail, because it turned a controlled beating into a public shooting involving a media figure who survived, and could describe every second of it. D'Angelo later pleaded guilty to the assault. Iannotti beat that part of the case, but was convicted on other charges. Junior himself beat the Sliwa case 3 different times. That whole sequence says a lot about Junior's run. He was still operating in his father's shadow, but he was already acting like the family's future belonged to him. A-Light's version of events is blunt on that point. He says Junior liked the idea of being in charge of the entire family and understood that his father's conviction would leave a lane open for him. The issue was not only ambition. It was the kind of ambition he had. He wanted the authority, the attention, the fear, and the image of command. But the men around him kept seeing the same weakness. He pushed reckless ideas, other people tried to slow him down, and then someone else had to carry the risk when he refused to listen. The Sliwa matter fits that pattern exactly. Junior wanted the move. Insiders warned him it was a bad target. The job still went forward, and the result was bigger and sloppier than planned. Through the 1990s, that did not stop him from rising. Public cases and mob reporting from the period described Junior as the acting boss after John Gotti Sr. went away in 1992. Later federal filings went even further and described him at different times as part of a ruling panel and as the de facto boss of the Gambino family. That is the high point of his run. He had the bloodline, he had the title people outside the family used for him, and he had enough standing inside the organization to act as the public continuation of his father's power, but the same years that put him in that position also built the case structure that would take him down. The racketeering investigation around him was no small matter. It drew in loan sharking, extortion, gambling, and the larger pattern of how he was operating while his father sat in prison and the family tried to keep the old structure intact. Then the run ended in the way a lot of insiders had already expected. In April of 1999, facing the racketeering case against him, Junior pleaded guilty. That plea changed everything. It did not just send him to prison. It removed him from the lane he had been holding since his father went away. The family still had the Gotti name, but Junior was no longer the man who could sit at the center of it on the street. That is where Peter Gotti moved in. By the end of 1999, Peter was the one federal sources and mob historians pointed to as the man taking over the family's working authority. Junior would later argue that he had left that life behind, but the later tapes and later disputes around his rank made clear that the break was not clean and the resentment never fully disappeared. So these 3 pieces belong together because they show the same arc from different angles. First, Junior fixates on Curtis Sliwa and ignores the warnings that a media target is different from an ordinary street problem. Then the attack itself goes forward and turns into a public mess, with a locked taxi, a hidden gunman, shots fired, and a victim who survives to tell the story. After that comes the larger result. Junior's period at the top is shorter than it looked in the moment. He rises under his father's conviction, holds real authority through the 1990s, then pleads guilty in 1999 and loses the lane. The Sliwa episode is one of the clearest looks at why his years were unstable. He had ambition, rank, and the Gotti name behind him. He also had poor judgment, a need to answer every insult, and a habit of pushing problems into bigger ones. That is the line from the Sliwa obsession to the plea, and from the plea to Peter Gotti taking over. By January of 2005, John Gotti Jr. was no longer just fighting cases in public. He was sitting down with federal prosecutors on his own request. The Mafia files refer to the meeting as a proffer session held on January 18, 2005, at the United States Attorney's Office in Lower Manhattan, at 500 Pearl Street. Jr. arrived with lawyers, Jeffrey Lichtman and Mark Furnish. On the government side were Robert Bueller, June Kim, and Jennifer Rogers. He read the proffer agreement, had the terms explained to him, signed it, and then started talking. That is what gives the scene its weight. This was not a rumor from the street. This was Junior Gotti, the son of John Gotti, sitting in a federal office and laying out information. What he gave them, at least in the account set by mob sources, reached back into some of the oldest and dirtiest parts of the Gotti story. He spoke about the Danny Silva killing at the Silver Fox, the bar fight that turned into a murder, and the way his name had to be removed from the investigation. He described Angelo Ruggiero meeting Detective John Daly at the Sherwood Diner with a brown paper bag holding $25,000 in cash, money meant to get Junior's name out of the case. He described being sent to Florida while the problem cooled down. He also spoke about John Sunamo, the witness pressure after the Silver Fox, and the story he was later told, that Sonamo's supposed suicide had really been a murder carried out on his father's orders by Ruggiero, Joe Watts, and Willie Boy Johnson. That is how broad the session was. It was not one narrow issue. It was Junior opening up old family business that had been locked inside the Gotti story for years. He did not stop there. He went into Oak Point in the Bronx, the modular home and detention center project, the money, the aliases, the permits, the bribery, and the political contacts. He spoke about Joe Zingaro. He spoke about cash moving through Bronx political channels. He spoke about another garbage dump venture in Pennsylvania, and said he sat down on that matter with his uncle Pete Gotti and Sammy Gravano, along with Lucchese figures including Anthony Casso and others. He also described the Gambino family's old access to the Queens District Attorney's Office through Anthony Guerrieri and a local political contact. The reason this matters is simple. Junior was not just trying to save himself by discussing one murder or one assault. He was laying out how the family handled payoffs, land deals, dump operations, and official influence. Even though no cooperation deal came out of it, the meeting itself tells that Junior was willing to cross a line that men in that world were never supposed to cross. The 2005 session also says something about Junior's position by then. He had already gone through years of prison, public cases, and family tension. He was no longer sitting in the chair the way he once expected to. The old line of succession had changed. Peter Gotti had moved into control after Junior's 1999 plea, and Junior was left in an in-between place, still carrying the Gotti name, still known as the Son, still dangerous, but no longer holding the same control over the family. So when he walked into Pearl Street in January of 2005, the scene was bigger than one legal strategy. It was the fallen heir sitting down with prosecutors, and showing how far the split had already gone between his old identity and his real position. That split becomes even clearer in the material about the Howard Beach crew turning against him. The book lays out taped prison conversations from 2003 and 2004, in which Junior could be heard complaining that his uncle Peter and others had taken over the leadership of the family and reduced him to captain. He is heard talking like a man who still thinks in rank, still thinks in chains of command, and still takes the demotion personally. On one tape he says he is going to bust heads when he gets out. That detail matters because it cuts against the defense he later tried to build. A man who has truly walked away does not keep talking like that. A man who is finished with the life does not complain that his uncle and the others took the family from him and knocked him down in rank. The other part of that same internal fight comes through a government report that was introduced at trial. It described a meeting in April of 2006 at a restaurant called Bahama Mamas in Northport, Long Island, where Colombo boss John Sonny Franzesi spoke about the Gambino leadership from Howard Beach. According to that report, Franzese said the Howard Beach crew was furious with Junior over his recent behavior. The reason given was direct. In their view, there was no such thing as quitting the mob. They believed Junior had money put away, believed he could not handle prison, and were upset enough that they sought outside approval for his murder. Franzese said he gave consent if they thought it was necessary. The old neighborhood base, that had once been the center of Gotti's strength, was now being described as a group willing to discuss killing John Gotti's own son. It was not only about Peter replacing Junior in a technical sense. It was about the old Howard Beach power structure deciding that Junior had become a problem. He was no longer the protected future of the family. He was now a source of anger, suspicion, and danger. The same crew base that once stood under the Gotti name was now being described as upset enough to move against him. The mob historians who study that period keep coming back to the same point. Junior's problem was not just the government. His problem was also his own family's leadership, his own neighborhood faction, and the reality that once Peter and the others took firm control, Junior became a rival, a burden, and possibly a target. Taken together, the proffer session and the Howard Beach material tell the same larger story from two sides. In one, Junior walks into a federal office and starts giving up information about murders, payoffs, dump deals, and political influence. In the other, he is caught on tape furious that Peter and the others have taken the family and pushed him down, while a separate report says leaders from his own side sought approval to kill him. One scene shows him reaching toward the government. The other shows the family turning away from him. Put side by side, they show how far he had fallen. He was no longer the unquestioned heir. He was a man between two worlds, distrusted by one, and talking to the other. Peter Gotti's years, at the top of the Gambino family, were never going to look like the age of John Gotti. By the time Peter moved into real authority, the shine was already gone, the cameras had already come, the cooperators had already spoken, and the family had already spent years being studied, chased, and broken apart by federal pressure. The old image of swagger still floated around the name, but the reality was smaller, harsher, and far less glamorous. This was not the season of a boss rising with the city at his feet. This was the season of a family trying to survive what the earlier years had already set in motion, with one brother in prison, another brother carrying the burden, and younger men around them learning that inheritance in that world could feel more like a sentence than a crown. Peter himself was built in the public mind the way John had been. He did not carry the same theatrical force, and he did not command the same kind of street mythology. Men around that life could respect a surname, but a surname alone could not stop captains from grumbling, could not stop rivals from testing weakness, and could not stop the government from tightening every wire it had already wrapped around the family. That is what makes Peter's era worth telling. It is the story of what happens after the loudest age ends, when the applause is gone, and only the machinery remains, still expected to produce fear, discipline, tribute, and order, even while the structure underneath is starting to buckle. John Gotti Jr. had once looked like continuation of the family line, the son stepping toward the chair while his father served life in prison. But Junior's own legal troubles, his plea, and the years of instability that followed opened the path for Peter to become the figure carrying the family's authority. On paper, that looked like a transfer of power inside the same bloodline. On the street, it felt more complicated than that. Junior still had his name, his grudges, and his own view of what leadership should have looked like, while Peter had the job itself, the federal heat attached to it, and the problem of keeping peace in a family where the old balance had already been badly damaged. That tension matters because Peter's period cannot be told as one clean chain of command. It competing loyalties, old resentments, and rank trying to hold back decay. Some men still saw the Gotti name as the center of the family. Others saw the situation more practically and cared less about legacy than about who could keep the street running, who could keep the money flowing, and who could keep them from being swallowed by indictments. That is how Peter's rule should be understood, not as a smooth reign, but as a contested holding action, one brother officially in place, another still hanging over the room, and the family itself no longer moving with the confidence it once pretended was natural. The Peter years are also the years when the Gambino story shifts hard away from the romance of flashy bosses and into the blunt economy of labor rackets, extortion, waterfront influence, and courtroom survival. The men around Peter were not simply colorful names drifting through the background. They were part of the actual mechanism that kept the family alive. Captain Anthony Ciccone and soldier Jerome Brancato stand out in that world because their cases made clear what the family was still trying to control: jobs, leverage, access, fear, and the systems that could still be milked long after the old myths had gone stale. These were not side characters in a fading opera. They were working parts inside a shrinking but still dangerous machine. That is one of the strongest ways to frame the Gambinos, under Peter Gotti. The family had not disappeared, but it had become more defensive, more administrative, and more dependent on men who could still operate quietly inside unions, docks, businesses, and old rackets without drawing the kind of circus attention that once followed John Gotti everywhere. Peter's years were about maintenance as much as dominance. Hold the line. Protect what is left. Keep the earners earning. Keep the captains from breaking apart. Keep the younger men from mistaking the family's famous name for actual strength. At the same time, Peter's period was haunted by unfinished business from the previous generation, especially the wound left by Sammy Gravano. Gravano's turn had helped destroy John Gotti's old command structure, and that kind of humiliation does not fade in that world just because time passes. The revenge plotting tied to Peter's era shows a family still trying to answer yesterday's betrayal while losing ground in the present. Instead of building a fresh future, too much of the energy still bent backward toward old scores, old injuries, and old ghosts. That is part of why the Peter chapter feels so grim. The family was under siege from the government, while still emotionally trapped in the wars that had already ruined it. And then there was Jackie Nose D'Amico, one of the most important figures in this whole period because he helps explain how the Gambino family kept functioning even while Peter sat in prison, and the formal throne meant less than it once had. Jackie was not the kind of figure who needed to be sold to the public with style and flash. He fit better as a street administrator, an organizer, a man who could hold rank, relay orders, and keep the structure from slipping into open chaos. He came from the older world of Gambino loyalty, from the years when closeness to John Gotti still mattered, and that background gave him standing. But by the Peter era, loyalty alone was not enough. Jackie's importance came from the fact that he could turn that old loyalty into practical control. That is why Jackie should not be treated as a side note. He is one of the central answers to the question of how the family still worked after Peter's imprisonment. Men like Jackie made the difference between a family that still had a street presence and a family that existed only as a legend told by newspapers and prosecutors. When the official boss is gone, somebody still has to settle tensions, maintain discipline, deal with captains, and protect the remaining structure from collapse. Jackie's lane was not about fame. It was about keeping the family moving in reduced form while the pressure kept rising from every direction. The strongest public proof of just how exposed the Gambinos had become came when the government reached not only into the family's crews, but into the administration itself. This is where the story gets heavier and more revealing, because it shows that the problem was no longer a few reckless soldiers or a single noisy captain. The pressure had climbed straight into the upper levels. Jackie D'Amico was identified in the leadership picture, and around him sat acting underboss Domenico Cefalu and consigliere Joseph Carrozzo. When those kinds of men are in the frame, it tells the audience that the family is not just dealing with damage at the edges. The center itself is under direct assault. That moment matters even more because the sweep around the Gambino family reached beyond the top trio. Captains, acting captains, soldiers, and associates were all pulled into the storm. That is how the Peter Gotti years should breathe on screen. Not as a static portrait of one man in a prison cell, but as a whole organization absorbing wave after wave of impact. Every indictment weakens more than one body. Every arrest shakes collections, reshuffles crews, creates fear, invites informants, and makes younger men wonder whether the old rewards are even worth the modern risk. Peter's time became the age when the Gambinos had to keep proving they still existed, while the federal system kept reminding them that survival and strength were no longer the same thing. The internal split with Junior adds another dark layer. Junior was not just any disappointed captain or sidelined relative. He was the son of the family's most famous modern boss, which meant his resentment carried symbolism as well as danger. Reports from that era described him complaining that Peter and the others had cut him down and reduced him to a lesser place than he believed was his by right. There were also ugly whispers from the underworld that the hostility had gone far enough for violent options to be discussed. Even if some of that stayed in the realm of plotting, rumor, or prison talk, it reveals a family at war with itself under the surface, one branch holding the title, another branch nursing the insult, and everybody else forced to choose where they stood. That sort of internal fracture is fatal in slow motion. A family under outside attack can sometimes survive if the inside remains disciplined. But if the outside pressure is relentless and the inside is poisoned by succession disputes, personal grudges, and wounded pride, the decline becomes much harder to stop. Peter Gotti inherited not just a criminal empire under siege, but a family culture shaped by spectacle, ego, and unresolved bloodline politics. The government did not create those fractures, but it knew how to exploit them. Every time the family lost another man to a case, another sentence, or another betrayal, the myth of unity looked weaker. The soldiers in Peter's time deserve real attention for that reason. In the public imagination, crime family history often gets flattened into bosses and headlines. But families do not run on bosses alone. They run on soldiers who collect, threaten, carry messages, enforce discipline, attend meetings, and keep the everyday system alive. Under Peter, those soldiers were operating in one of the worst environments any post-commission generation had known. Surveillance was constant. Federal cases were smarter and broader than before. Cooperators had changed the culture. The old code that once promised silence and reward no longer felt as solid as the men at the top wanted to pretend. So when the government reached the Gambinos during Peter's years, it was hitting not just famous faces, but the connective tissue of the family itself. Every soldier lost to prison meant one less reliable arm in the neighborhood. Every acting captain dragged into a case meant confusion below him. Every associate picked up meant another potential witness, another frightened earner, another weak point in the chain. Peter Gotti's period begins when John Gotti Jr. stops being able to hold the family in his own hands. Junior had the bloodline, and for a time he had the public image of succession. But the plea in 1999 cut the ground out from under that run. The Mafia's history books returns to that split years later through the prison tapes played at trial, where Junior could be heard complaining that Uncle Peter and others had taken over the family and knocked him down to capo. The same stretch of evidence brought in the report about the Howard Beach crew being so angry with Junior that approval to kill him was discussed with Sonny Franzese. That is the transition. Junior falls back. Peter steps in. The Gotti name stays on top, but the family underneath it is already divided, under pressure, and no longer moving the way it did in John Gotti Sr.'s prime. The book does not present Peter as a second John Gotti. It presents him as part of the family structure that had always been there, one of the brothers, the one Alite knew as Pete, the garbage man, because of his old sanitation job. That is an important detail because it helps fix the image correctly. Peter was not a public performer. He was not a street prince like Junior. He was not the media figure his brother had become. He was the family man inside the family, useful because he was a Gotti older than Junior, already trusted, and in position to keep the title in the bloodline after Junior could no longer do it. That is why Peter's years feel different from the start. The family wanted continuity. What it got was a holding operation. Mob historians usually describe Peter's period as the years when the Gambinos stopped looking like a headline machine and started looking like an organization, trying to keep from losing more ground. Our sources support that reading from the inside. Junior is bitter on tape. The Howard Beach crew is angry. The old Gotti line is still in place, but the unity is gone. Public records support the same picture from the outside. Peter was later described in public reporting as the man who took command after his brother was locked up, and by the end of his life he had served more than 17 years in prison on a 25-year sentence. Those are not the markers of expansion. Those are the markers of a regime built around survival, damage control, and keeping the family name in place while federal cases kept landing. The waterfront case is one of the clearest ways to understand Peter's reign, because it strips away the old talk and gets down to the real business. Federal records tied Peter Gotti, Anthony Ciccone, and Jerome Brancato to the Gambino side of the waterfront and labor racketeering structure. Ciccone was identified as a Gambino captain and former Ely official. Brancato was identified as a Gambino soldier. The government said the case grew out of years of organized crime influence over the International Longshoremen's Association, its welfare and pension funds, and businesses operating on the piers in New York, New Jersey, and beyond. In the government's account, Peter, Ciccone, and Brancato were connected to extortion and fraud involving waterfront businesses, including bridgeside drayage, and operations at the Howland Hook Marine Terminal, and to laundering proceeds tied to those schemes. This is the Peter Gotti period in practical terms. Not suits on courthouse steps. Not street glamour, but business on the docks, taking contracts, dealing with union leverage, fraud, and racketeering. That waterfront picture also fills in the cast around Peter in a more useful way than the broad Gotti family stories do. Anthony Ciccone was not just another name attached to an indictment. He was a captain with labor union reach. Jerome Brancato was not just background muscle. He was part of the family's working body on the docks. The government's filing also named high-ranking ILA figures including John Bowers, Robert Gleason, Albert Cernadas, Harold Daggett, and Arthur Coffey, with the claim that organized crime families used those connections to control positions, contracts, and money inside the waterfront system. Peter's years are easier to understand once they are placed there. This was a family trying to keep influence in industries where old methods still paid, and where a boss in prison could still matter if the right captains and soldiers were moving for him on the outside. The Sammy Gravano revenge case belongs right in the middle of this period, because it shows how much of Peter's time was still tied to John Gotti's old wounds. Gravano was the witness whose testimony had helped bury John Gotti in 1992. More than a decade later, Peter was charged and then convicted in connection with a plot to have Gravano killed as payback. Public reporting at the time was direct about the motive. Prosecutors said Peter was seeking revenge for the testimony that helped destroy his brother. The point here is not only that Peter was convicted. The point is that one of the defining criminal stories of his reign was still backward-looking. Instead of building something new, the administration was still trying to answer the betrayal that had broken the family in the first place. Then came the sentence that locked Peter's period into place. Public reporting said he received a 25-year prison term after being convicted on racketeering and related charges that included the Gravano plot, and that sentence came on top of the earlier prison time already hanging over him from the waterfront and labor case. By that point, the question around the Gambino family changed. It was no longer simply whether Peter was the boss in title. The real question became who was carrying the family on the street while Peter sat in prison. Once that question takes over, the story naturally moves away from Peter as a day-to-day field presence and toward the men running the outside administration. That is the bridge to Jackie Knows. By February of 2009, the FBI was publicly describing D'Amico as a capo who was then serving as the acting boss of the Gambino crime family. In that same federal case, D'Amico was charged with racketeering conspiracy involving murder, extortion, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and gambling, along with the murder of Frederick Weiss, a man the family believed was cooperating. Those charges tell the story clearly enough. Peter held the family name at the top of the post-junior order, but the street side had moved to D'Amico and the administration around him.